Hello everyone, thanks for joining me to learn about how to do in-text citations. There are two times you need to include in-text citation in your papers: when you directly quote your source and when you paraphrase your source. Remember, direct quotes are when you copy someone word for word. Paraphrasing is when you summarize what was said in your own words. When you are writing a research paper, it is important to give credit when you do either of these things. I am going to show you an example of how to do that. To make it clear, I'm going to pretend that I'm writing a paper. My paper's topic will be the impact of historical fiction movies on education. Thinking about the writing process, I have already completed the first two steps. First, I brainstorm what I already know, and then I do background reading, which is Research 1, to gain additional information about my topic. Next, I came up with my thesis. It is, although not always completely historically accurate, historical fiction movies help to educate the masses and draw productive attention to events and topics of which the public should be aware. My next step is Research 2, where I look for specific information that will prove my thesis. Now I am ready to actually begin my research task. First, I have to define my task and identify what information I'll need to support my thesis. I'm looking to prove movies reach a lot of people and teach them about topics that they normally might not know about, and good conversations and movements come out of historical fiction movies being made. Let me show you where I got my research for both Research 1 and Research 2. Looking for good sources is part of the information-seeking strategies Ms. Gardner teaches us. First, I went to CPS's virtual library. The easiest way to get there is to go to cps.edu/library or Google CPS Virtual Library. This is what you will see. Once I got to the library page, I clicked on Library Databases in the upper left-hand corner. That brought me to this, where I have multiple options of different kinds of articles I want to read. I clicked on Newsbank because it has more current or recent, meaning from 1985 on, articles. If I scroll down to the part about history, I find Civil Rights Act 50th anniversary. Clicking more, it brought me to a variety of articles, one being the one I used about Selma. I clicked on the article I wanted to read and read it through carefully. After reading it through, one quote in particular stuck out to me. Because of this film, Selma becomes one of the place names that stands as a significant milestone in American history. This quote helped me prove my thesis that movies can draw attention to historical events that people should know about. I will use it as a direct quote because I want to use it word for word. I'm going to show you a couple examples of what a direct quote looks like. As you can see, the first part of the quote always looks the same. I will read it through once and then point out the changes. Although not always completely historically accurate, historical fiction movies help to educate the masses and draws productive attention to events and topics which the public should be aware. In today's day and age, technology plays a big role in people's lives. We rely on media such as websites, movies, videos, and social media to get a lot of our information. Our country is rich with history, but not everyone is familiar with all the events in history, especially particular details about historical events. When a movie like Selma is made about a historical event, masses of people are informed about the event, and this often triggers people to do their own research to find out more information. The attention brought to Selma is a perfect example of this happening. According to Rawls, 2015, because of this film, Selma becomes one of the place names that stands as a significant milestone in American history. Page 1. Since the movie, they have seen an increase of visitors wanting to see the historical location where this march occurred. Notice that the quote is in orange. I added according to with the author's last name and then the date in parentheses, comma, and then the quote in quotation marks. The quote ends in a comma instead of a period. Then I end the quotation marks and include the page number in parentheses with a period at the end after the last parentheses. Here is another example of how I could use the quote. All the rest of my paragraph is exactly the same, but instead of using according to, I just begin the quote right at the start, and then at the end, use a comma instead of a period, quotation mark, parentheses, author's last name, comma, date, comma, and the page number, end parentheses with a period. In this last example of how to use a direct quote, again, the rest of my paragraph is the same, but this time I say Rawls, which is the author's name, parentheses with the date, end parentheses, wrote, comma, and then insert the quote using quotation marks. At the end of the quote, I have a comma instead of a period, end quotation marks, and then have the page number in parentheses with a period at the end of the sentence. For the sake of time, I'm going to use the same article to show you an example of paraphrasing for in-text citation. Remember, when you are writing your paper, you can use a source more than once, but you should really use a variety of different kinds of sources to really prove your point. At the end of the paragraph I wrote above, I mentioned that people want to see the historical location where the march occurs. My next paragraph will use the information from the article in my own words, which is paraphrasing. So that you can see my example clearly, I highlighted the information that I'm paraphrasing. It is written using different words than in the article. The article reads, "Today, the bridge and adjoining downtown business district look much as they did in 1965, except many storefronts are empty and government buildings are occupied largely by African American officials. Attractions related to the protests are all within walking distance of the bridge. They include the First Baptist Church, where many protests were organized, and Brown Chapel AME Church, where marchers congregated before going to the bridge and where they sought safety after being beaten." This is what I wrote using the information from the article. You can see that I highlighted the information that I got from the article, but again, it's in my own words. Tourists arriving in Selma have a variety of historic options to visit. Luckily, most of the buildings in the area are the same. Many places that draw tourists include the First Baptist Church. This is where the protests were organized. Another place people visit is the bridge itself. You can walk from the bridge to most of the other places you want to visit. Finally, many people want to go to the Brown Chapel AME Church. This is where protesters gathered before the march. After the march, when there were lots of injured people, they went there as a safe place. Notice I put the author, date, and page number in parentheses at the end of this paragraph to indicate that that is where I got my information that I stated above. In this example, I have the same paragraph, but I start out by saying according to Rawls, which is the author, with the date in parentheses, then a comma, and then go into my description of what I read in the article. If my source has a page number, I would include it at the end before the period in parentheses. The final thing I want to show you today is what a source written in the reference page at the end of the paper should look like. This is an example of what I found at Owl Purdue as to what it should look like for a journal article found online. At the end of your paper, you will need to be sure to create a reference page that lists all your sources in alphabetical order. The reference page should be a separate page than your paper. Again, make sure that you put all of your sources in alphabetical order. In the picture, you see an example of what it would look like from the OWL Purdue before you plug in your information if you were doing a journal article like mine. I add my sources as I go along, so I don't have to write them all up at the end, and so I could keep track of the sources I used. Here's how I cite my sources for the paraphrasing and direct quotes that I used above. On the OWL Purdue site, I clicked on the tab that says Reference List, Electronic Sources. Then, I scrolled to the newspaper article. I found this example of how to do my work. I will type my information into the format exactly how it looks. I will make sure to keep capital letters where they're supposed to be capitals and lower cases in other places, even though it seems strange. Keep italics where they are, punctuation, like periods, commas, and parentheses where they're supposed to be, and make sure that all the lines after the first one is indented 1/2 inch. It will look like this. Once I have done these steps for all my sources and finished my draft, I will give it to several people to read and give me feedback. I will make the appropriate changes and repeat until I feel confident that my paper has little to no errors. Your turn. Make sure to go use these steps to cite your sources in your informational papers. Good luck, and let me know if you have any questions.